Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Merci d'être avec nous pour ce nouvel échange. Vous êtes encore très nombreux sur un thème très important qui est celui que rencontrent les activistes dans la lutte contre la peine de mort, et en particulier deux catégories principales qui sont représentées ici, les avocats.
It's for lawyers and journalists.
Alors, on va le voir, les avocats et les journalistes ont beaucoup de choses en commun. Ils
both have many things in common.
Ils portent une parole publique.
They have a voice in public and do research. There are similar risks.
Peuvent-ils collaborer
and
ensemble?
Also, they can they work together?
C'est une question que nous poserons dans la seconde partie de ce débat, dans une demi-heure environ.
And we are going to ask this question in a couple of minutes. Afterwards, there's going to be some space for questions, and our panelists come from 5 different countries facing different realities, and they have many things in common. So Sandra Babcock is American.
Qui est avocate, donc je ne la présente pas pour vous, mais pour les autres, je le dis quand même, professeur à la Cornell Law School et directrice de la faculté. Vous êtes aussi fondatrice du Cornell Center on Death Penalty Worldwide. Je me tourne vers Kirsten Hahn. Vous êtes à 14 fuseaux horaires de New York, vous êtes à Singapour.
Very far from us, an activist, journalist in Singapore, freelance for, and you publish the review We, which is the only which talks about death penalty. And you are the first advocate in your country, Fatima Tambe, and you have many things to say, and there's this purpose, and you, Anna, are from Tanzania. You are a lawyer and executive director of the Legal Center for Human Rights, and the only gentleman is from Iran, Kambiz Ghafouri, journalist and activist for human rights. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michel Joras. I'm journalist, reporter. Michel Buret, sorry. And our exchange is in 4 parts. The first one is on obstacles in the fight against death penalty. The next is on the risks you are facing in this fight. The third part is on death penalty as a political tool, and the fourth part is on cooperation between lawyers and journalists, and the last part is a Q&A. It's a video by Maurice Baclair, who is a journalist and researcher who contributed a lot of stopping executions in one of the states of the United States. The first question I would like to ask, you talked about about proceedings an accusation against you. You have the floor.
Thank you for having me.
Merci.
My name is Kirsten. I'm a journalist and abolitionist from Singapore. And so to kick off today's session, I was asked to talk about what I'm currently facing in Singapore. So for work related to the death penalty, I currently have 2 open police investigations related to supposed illegal assembly, by which they mean I stood outside the prison sometimes, and also 1 current conditional warning for contempt of court for a Facebook post that I made 5 months ago about lawyers and cost orders against lawyers who take on death penalty cases. So these are the sorts of examples of harassment that I and fellow abolitionists in Singapore have faced, which we currently have to fight against. So today, for instance, I finally got confirmation that the applications that I filed to sue the Attorney General and the police back for giving me the conditional warning has been accepted by the courts.
C'est une très bonne nouvelle, mais
that's great news. And what I find interesting is that in Singapore, the authorities never talk about death penalty.
Yeah, so in Singapore, the government is extremely to their political position of showing strength. And we also have press freedom problems, so then the mainstream media will always follow the government line. So we actually don't get discussion in mainstream platforms about the death penalty, about why it's used, how it's used, and if it's even working. So everything just follows the government line that it's working. And at the same time, while being so proud of the death penalty, the government also does not want to release information on the death penalty. So we have to be the ones to keep shedding light on this issue, to tell the stories of the prisoners on death row, to be reporting and documenting on all the executions that happen, just so that we can keep pushing it in front of people and make them face it, right? Make it harder for them to just dismiss it as an abstract problem.
Merci beaucoup. Fatimata, en Mauritanie, vous m'avez dit
in Mauritania, the state never talks about death penalty. It's not a topic. Why not? Why not? It's their legislation. Please talk into the mic like me. Thank you very much. That's a very sensitive issue, and the majority of the population is very attached to the Islamic dogma and the Quran. So that means that it would not be correct to talk about these things. But even lawyers had difficulty talking about death penalty as a crime against human dignity. And today, we get together and we talk about human rights, and we talk also about the death penalty. Tell me about your itinerary. You are the first lawyer of your country, and you are a very active activist. And when it comes to your studies, and what has changed since the days of being at university? Well, in Mauritania, there's the application of Sharia. In my day, when I went to university, every Friday, the whole population had to attend to public executions or amputation of arms or legs and such things. Flogging for people to see how the Sharia is applied. And this time was a black time of these were exceptional tribunals, and that was the application of the Sharia, which was abandoned a couple of years ago. But since then, we punish people with death. We condemn them to death. We practice flogging and others. But there's a moratorium from 1987, where the last executions were applied. As a lawyer, I meet every day people who are convicted to death penalty, and the trouble is it's people who are on death row without knowing when everything will end, because there's a moratorium, they are not liberated, they stay on death row. And that's a very painful person for the convict, as well as for the lawyer, as well as for the family. There's nothing what the lawyers, the barristers can do in order to help the client or to liberate the person. Also, if you consider that a woman does things which are accused of offenses because of the Sharia, for example, blasphemia, and also it's very difficult because the public is really very aggressive if you defend people like this. And I was accused in the social medias. I was accused of anti-Islamism and the thumb of Pharaoh. And at tribunal, there are women who do not, clerks who do not talk to me because I defend some woman and who was accused of blasphemy. And these ex-convicts try not to stay in Mauritania because it's too dangerous, they will die. So that's very important, the impact of public opinion on authorities when it comes to choices which do not correspond to the ruling opinion. Anna, you are also a lawyer, a barrister. You work in an African country, in East Africa. And in your country, is it easier to speak up as an abolitionist?
Thank you so much. Yes, in Tanzania, it is easy to speak about death penalty. First, because Tanzania is a secular state. It's not like say it's a religious state. We have two main religions, Christianity and Islam, but it's a secular state. So it's a little bit easy to talk about death penalty, though death penalty is not something taken I would say seriously, or it's not a priority. Most of the time, politicians, judges, even public officials would treat it as not something important. Not abolishing death penalty is not something important. We, as lawyers in my organization, I lead an organization of lawyers, and we had filed several cases against death penalty. And most of the cases we are suing the government and the Attorney General for not abolishing death penalty, because we are members of the UN and we are supposed to follow human rights principles. And most of the cases.
Combien de personnes ont été condamnées à mort? Vous m'aviez donné ce chiffre. Est-ce que ces peines sont exécutées?
Sorry, maybe to ask it in English.
Sorry, how many people were convicted and were the death penalty applied?
Okay, thank you. Death penalty has not been executed from since 1994, and up to year 2020, there were 480 prisoners on death row. But In 2020, the former president, the late John Pombe Magufuli, released 256 people who were on the death row and commuted them to a life sentence. But still there are 200 plus people who are on the death row. And the process of commuting those 256 was not very transparent, so we don't know why 200 plus people are still on the death row. So I was talking about the case, maybe I'd finish there. So one of the cases, the judges, the way they argued was also in favor of public opinion. I did not see the argument like legally analyzed. It was according to the public opinion. So that's the case in Tanzania.
Merci beaucoup. Vous aviez cité...
Thank you very much, but maybe 400 people were convicted since.
Sauf erreur, c'est le chiffre que j'ai retenu et qui m'offrait une occasion
ont été donc condamnés depuis un certain nombre d'années. And our panelists from Iran would tell me how that 400 people were executed in your country. Is that true?
Yes, I will go back to the numbers. First, I would like to take a moment to remember my brave compatriots, brave Iranian men and women, especially women, in the street, protesting peacefully for their basic rights. After the... thank you. After the horrible murder of 22-year-old Jina Mahsa Amini under custody of Iranian hijab police, the protesters' slogan, main slogan, is Zan Zendegi Azadi, or Zhenjian Azadi, means woman, life, liberty. So life in this between is one of the key words. We are all fighting for right to the life. I will go back to the numbers. 474 people have been executed so far in Iran since the beginning of this year. 474, each one, like Mahsa Amini, had a name, had a life, had someone who loved them, and they are not here. They are not numbers. We are not talking about numbers. But unfortunately, the numbers are so high that it's shocking everyone. If you go to the website iranhr.net, there is a counter. Every day, we have some more people in that counter. So that's the reality. And regarding journalists, it is very difficult for my colleagues in Iran to even report about that, because talking about death penalty, I mean, in criticizing death penalty is also a crime. Death penalty is considered in Iranian laws as a holy thing. So once in 2014, a newspaper just quoted a sentence from a political scientist and called qisas, in quotation mark, inhuman punishment. They've shut down the newspaper and arrested its manager. So this is the situation. In Iran, we should not only fight for the right to abolition, but we should fight for the right to talk about that. This is the situation now in Iran.
So it's about freedom of speech as well. Ceci me donne l'occasion de donner la parole à Sandra Babcock, qui a une vision...
I'd like to give the floor to Sandra Babcock, à présent, qui a une vision
des 5 continents.
Qui a donc
qui montre bien que
a une vue d'ensemble qui prouve qu'on a de nombreux obstacles
de la société,
there are legal obstacles. So which are today the most important obstacles, and how could we overcome these obstacles, especially when it comes to those who are fighting, who fight against death penalty and who are often in danger to be killed themselves. So how can we help them? Sandra, you have the floor.
First of all, I just want to say what an honor it is to be sharing this stage with such incredible human rights activists, and especially the fierce warrior for human rights, Fatimata Mbaye, who is just such an extraordinary lawyer and advocate, as well as Anna and everyone else. Anyway, I think that one of the big problems is that lawyers and journalists alike are somewhat invisible in the struggle against the death penalty. We both have these, professional obligations that require us to, in a way, put on a costume and leave our emotions at the door. And as a result, and I think that when you look at the way the international community has approached abolition and has approached criminal justice issues around the world, and particularly in the global South, they have focused on accountability, anti-corruption measures, governance. They have not focused on due process, fair trials, and support for the people who are on the front lines defending people who are risking capital punishment, many of whom are innocent, many of whom have not, who have maybe committed a crime, but not a capital crime, many of whom are human beings who have endured unimaginable suffering. And the lawyers who are defending them are people who have also struggled immensely against very difficult odds, as the journalists do, but yet they are not receiving the resources that they need in order to do their jobs, whereas prosecutors are routinely funded. Law enforcement is routinely funded. They are the international community, foreign governments, they organize trainings, they fund trainings. So you have a huge mismatch in the resources that are available to the defense and to the prosecution. And yet nobody really seems to have clued into this and how problematic it is, because the lawyers are on the front lines, really defending individual lives. And journalists too. I mean, one of the things that we've spoken about that maybe in a few minutes I'll talk more about is vicarious trauma, and that is something that affects journalists as well as lawyers. All of us who are doing this work are accompanying our clients, are accompanying people who are suffering, not just our clients, but their family members who are grieving, who are desperate for news of their loved ones, and that affects us too. And yet that also is not something that is routinely or really at all recognized. And we don't receive the resources that we need to deal with our own pain as well as the needs of our clients. And I think that's especially true in the global South.
Mais vous-même, par exemple, aux États-Unis, vous vivez dans un pays où, on l'a dit, le progrès en matière d'abolition de la peine de mort est faible ces dernières années.
Little support in the United States for the death penalty. Do you have the impression that you're supported? Has this changed?
The death penalty in the U.S. Yeah, I mean, I think that the death penalty in the U.S., in the years that I've been doing this work, I started in 1991, we've made a lot of progress. And, individual lawyers and organizations are doing their best, and they're doing incredible work. Journalists have been really just incredibly influential in telling the stories of our clients. And I think Kristen mentioned sort of telling these stories and how important it is to change public opinion. We'll never get there as lawyers without journalists and without the activists. But, the progress is not as quick as we'd like it to be. And one of the problems is that we now have a regressive majority on the US Supreme Court. Many of us had hoped that one day our Supreme Court would abolish the death penalty as a violation of our Constitution. That is no longer, in my view anyway, an option in the foreseeable future. So it comes down to state by state battles. And those, you know, we have made progress, but there are certain parts of the country that where, again, we have regressive, politicians who care much more about the unborn lives of fetuses than they do about the lives of fully developed human beings, and can't see the contradiction in that. So we have cowardly politicians, and we have a general population that is not educated about the death penalty, doesn't care about it enough to make it an issue that they vote on. So you really need people of courage and who have the political will to do this. And, you know, unfortunately, those people are few and far between.
Merci Sandra. Je me tourne à nouveau vers vous, Kirsten.
Now I'm coming back to you, Kirsten. We have talked about many things already. We have also talked about the vicarious trauma, about the stress which is caused when you assist to the execution of the death penalty, or when you confront people who don't share your view. What about your daily work? Do you feel threatened in one way or another by people who don't share your view, or do you feel menaced, threatened by government bodies, by the authorities in one way or another? Do you feel a threat like this?
We are aware that we are being watched by the government and that they really don't like the work that we do as abolitionists, and we do see, you know, government social media posts or press releases that attack us. So we are aware of that, but that's just become something that we've had to incorporate into our everyday sort of calculations of the things that we do. We do also sometimes get pushback from the public, but not as much as the government would like people to believe. So Singapore's government will always say that the vast majority of Singaporeans are pro-death penalty and support the death penalty. But on a day-to-day basis, we often see and experience kindness and compassion rather than pushback, right? So I work with families of death row prisoners. These families might not be Singaporean, and sometimes they need money to come to Singapore to visit because it's very expensive to travel to Singapore. And sometimes we have to do crowdfunding to raise the money for them to come. And Singaporeans have been very willing to give and feel compassionate. And when there have been executions this year, we have seen Singaporeans come to the memorials. They bring flowers, they bring food, they donate money to the families. So I think we do see that while a lot of Singaporeans are very hesitant about speaking up publicly because we do live in an authoritarian environment, that kind of on a day-to-day, person-to-person interaction, there is actually a lot of compassion there.
Donc, gardez le micro, Kirsten.
Please keep the mic, because I would like to ask you something else. So you have the impression that the Singaporean public opinion is mature enough, but the government continues to uphold its conservative position. And this is a very interesting point that you mentioned.
So we have, because there is such limited space for discussion about the death penalty, there's a lot more nuance in the situation than what is being reflected to the international community and to Singaporeans, right? So when we see what the government says, they'll always say we did this survey and 80% of Singaporeans agree with us. But academics have also run public opinion surveys that discovered that while the majority of Singaporeans do kind of say that they support the death penalty, a lot of them also admit that they don't actually know how it works or how it's implemented. So it's a very theoretical thing, right? You go up to somebody, you go, do you support the death penalty? And they're like, oh yes, if there's a serial killer, of course. You know, so we find that the more people learn about the death penalty, the more they start to at least ask questions, and the more their kind of resolve waivers and their support waivers. So it's really an argument for more public education, which is very difficult to get. I think, so my sense is that that's why governments are so unwilling to be transparent and to talk about the death penalty, because the more people know about it, the more questions they're asking.
Absolument. Ça nous amène effectivement.
Absolutely, yeah. So this leads us to the instrumentalization of the death penalty as a political means. Fatima said that it's the Sharia, the divine law in Mauritania. So that's the point of view with people, but it's also in the law, in the legislation, isn't it? And Iran, it's the divine law, it's the holy world, which cannot be discussed, can it? So there are countries where the death penalty is not applied, but there are countries where it is applied. The death penalty is applied in a precise moment and in a precise political context, isn't it? Can you tell us more about this? Why does Iran apply these capital punishments now, these death penalties now? What is this tool of terror? Because it's more an instrument of terror more than an instrument of justice, isn't it?
Indeed. The death penalty itself is political, but everything in Iran is political. Iranian authorities are using the death penalty to spread fear, especially when they are scared of protests, mass protests. And it is political because before some political events, like elections, the number of executions go down. So, because they need votes from people. Then again, after protests, when they want to spread fear, they start executions. The number goes up. And they used execution for repression, as a repression tool. In 1980s, they mass murdered many political prisoners in Iran. So it's a political tool in the hand of an authoritarian regime to spread fear and to control the society. That's why we are scared that the regime repeats the same pattern right now, because they've arrested thousands of peaceful protesters, and they are now, many of them, accused of something like muharebe. Muharebe means waging war against God, and it could be punishable by death. Or another term is ifsad fil arz, corruption on earth. So it's a vague term. Everything you do that the regime doesn't like might be a corruption on earth, and you might face execution. So they use the death penalty as a political tool to control the society, to spread fear. And right now, I think we need a special attention from the international community. The international community should send a clear message to the Islamic Republic of Iran that it does not tolerate a single execution of protesters, and the international community sees this act as a serious crime. I think it is very important for all of us to raise our voice and to save lives of Iranians. And they did nothing other than peacefully protest and nothing other than demanding their basic rights.
Merci beaucoup, Candice.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anna Henga, the situation in East Africa is naturally very different, but also in the countries surrounding your country. When we spoke on the phone, you were just traveling as a lawyer. You were in Kenya. This morning, we learned that Zambia is about to abolish the death penalty. So we see that there is a development in this region, Uganda or in Kenya. When you speak out on this, what are the arguments that you use, and what is the outreach of your arguments in the different countries in which you travel? Do you have the impression that there are some signs, some signals that things are getting better, that they're improving, not only in Tanzania, but in the countries surrounding Tanzania? Do you have that impression?
Yes, I do have that impression that things are improving. As the examples you've given about Malawi abolishing, Rwanda, and so Zambia is in the process. The bill is in Parliament, and in December I think they'll get a new law amending altogether the death penalty. In Tanzania, the fact that the death penalty warrants have not been signed since 1994, and in 2020 the former president saying that he would never sign a death warrant, and commuting others to life imprisonment, it's a good sign. I see political will is there, and even during UPR, the Universal Periodic Review in Tanzania, there was also a good sign of abolishing it. Our neighbors in Kenya and Uganda, there are also good signs of abolishing the death penalty. Only they fear that public opinion, as I'm saying. But for me, I see it is very wrong to rely on public opinion on a human rights issue. Why? Because public opinion is not always right, because it is very subjective. It is very subjective. So you can't rely on it. I'll give you an example of Tanzania when we were reintroducing multipartism. 80% of people in Tanzania were against multipartism in Tanzania. Only 20% were in favor of multipartism. But still the government backed into multipartism. So they didn't consider the issue of public opinion. And later on we discovered multipartism is a way to go because it's a good thing. So the government saw that is a good thing, and due to democracy is a good thing. So for all countries in East Africa, I see progress. I see, because even in Kenya, for instance, they've not executed for the past 30 years. Many people in Kenya are on death row. So I think the fact of not executing is a positive thing. It's a sign that the penalty is not practicable. It's not needed in the countries. So I think there is progress, I would say.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Effectivement,
thank you very much. In effect, yes, when we prepared this discussion, we said to us that in some countries where the death penalty has been abolished, like in France, this was very quick. Robert Badinter, Mitterrand, a law, and it was over. But the way is much harder and longer in your countries, isn't it? I think we all share this point of view. Fatima, we listened to Anna Henga, and you see, she travels in several countries, but she's not faced there with a religious conception of the law, with a religious conservative conception of the law, but she is faced with public opinion, and the authorities play with public opinion. You said that in your country the government instrumentalizes the death penalty in this context. Is that right? Can you elaborate on that? Yes, as far as instrumentalization is concerned, there are people who are arrested because they demonstrated. They're accused of demonstrating, but in general, how can I say this? The penalty stipulated is the death penalty. Since 1968, we live under military rule in Mauritania. And when there are military coups, when people are accused of fomenting them, or there are people who are facing charges of fomenting a coup because they demonstrated And the punishment that is there, well, it's always the death penalty. So in the law, so in the penal code, there are stipulations that show this instrumentalization of political power in order to punish people who are opponents or who are human rights defenders. And the Mauritanian government did not hesitate. It made a covenant with the ulemas. It made a contract, a pact with the ulema people. So everything that concerns the ulemas, those are the doctors of faith. Yes, those are the learned people, the imams. So when it's about the hadith, the prophet, religious practice, immediately the ulemas will organize a demonstration and will ask for the exclusion of that person who criticized the hadith, for example, and they will ask for the death penalty. As I said before, with this Hamid Tahrir dossier, you remember that was in the international press, and we tried to help this young man to be saved. He would have been sentenced to death. And this young man, well, faced tribunal, but no public declaration, public statement was made. Nobody asked for his release. The state uses the ulemas' protestations and demonstrations in order to condemn this person because he was against the religious practices or something else. So this is sufficient for the capital punishment, and it's also about distilling fear into the population. And this becomes case law, doesn't it? Yes, it becomes case law. Because the release of this young man, what was the consequence? Yeah, it was the amendment of an article, Article 306 in the Penal Code of Mauritania. In this article, it was initially stipulated that every person facing charges of blasphemy or heresy must repent. And this article was modified, amended after this condemnation. So the death penalty is a legalized, a legal penalty. Nobody has the right to just to repent. And today we say it is a deprivation of a sacred right, because we are talking about Sharia, about the religion. Pardon and grace is important. So each individual should have the right to repent. And it is in the Constitution. You know, you see here this instrumentalization used by the government bodies, the authorities. The devil is in the detail. That's very interesting to see here as well. So we have 11 or 12 minutes left, because we want to elaborate further on the cooperation between those two public voices, the lawyer and the journalist, with regard, naturally, to the death penalty. I'm a journalist, I know it. We have collaborations with lawyers, but they must be based on trust. Trust from the lawyer toward the journalist and vice versa. But both professions are in different time frames, so this creates misunderstandings, this creates problems. I would like to summarize a little bit the idea of what we're saying here. So even if those two professions work in the same direction, sometimes it's not compatible. We have frequently the same ideas, but there can be faux pas. So my question: how does the lawyer, and I'm talking to you, Sandra, because you talked about your experience in the United States as well as a professor and in other fields, how did you succeed in collaborating better with journalists, and how did the failures in this cooperation come about?
It's a great question, and I think you know, the best answer I can come up with is that it's about building relationships, like everything we do in life. I think that for me, the best collaboration, and it's not truly a collaboration, it's always a transactional relationship between a lawyer and a journalist, because we don't have the same goals most times. Even if journalists are opposed to the death penalty or they think that your client shouldn't be executed, they usually won't say that because, again, that implicates their own sort of professional duty to be perceived as neutral. So what is important, I think, and I think a lot of lawyers make the mistake of just not speaking to journalists, not returning their calls, and not really having a media strategy. In every case that I'm involved in, we have a media strategy. We have a media strategy, and sometimes that strategy is we're not going to talk to the press, but we never will ignore them. We will say that we can't speak to you for whatever reason, but we're not going to ignore them. But many times it's very helpful to work with journalists. I take the case of Melissa Lucio, whose execution was stayed earlier this year by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. And in her case, I think the articles that were written about her, and in combination with a lot of the activism and legal work that was going on, were really critical in shifting public opinion in her favor. So you have to get to know journalists so that you can trust them. You can know whether you can trust them, and you have to give them the narrative that you want them to write about your client. Because if you don't do that, then they're going to pick the facts from the official, they're going to use the mugshot from when your client was arrested instead of the nice photograph that you might have of her with her family. They're going to, pick the facts from the official case file or the police reports or the prosecution's narrative, which we know is not the full story. So I think relationships are key.
Gardez le micro parce que j'ai une question de rebond sur...
Would you please keep the microphone? You told me about death row, where you shared with a journalist the proofs and the fact of accompanying a person, and then you see her executed, and the kind of stress, post-traumatic stress, which can be caused by this. And journalists and lawyers should accept that they have many things in common, and there's no psychological support. Maybe you can create a solidarity and get more support.
It's an interesting question. I don't know of anyone who has brought together journalists who have witnessed executions with lawyers. I like that idea. It's hard because it's such a personal experience and it's so damaging. And for many people in this work, I think it brings up past traumas as well. So it's a difficult one. It's difficult to talk about, but it's important too because, and frankly, it's not just journalists and lawyers. It's everyone who participates in the execution process. It's even prison guards who are present. It's the chaplains and faith, people of faith who accompany people who are executed. So. It is something that we really don't talk about, and I think we need to start talking about it because it is, it's very difficult. I think it's difficult for all of us to cope with that kind of trauma, and most people don't understand it. They don't treat it as if, you lost a loved one. Like if you have a friend or a family member and they lose someone that they love, you extend, your sympathy and you ask what you can do for them and you bring them food. Nobody does that when our clients are executed, and we love them. Many times we have great affection for our clients and we've been there with them for years. And people don't do that for journalists who have also, I think, sometimes become very emotionally invested, even though they can't say that they are. They become very emotionally invested in the stories that they write. And they witness these atrocities, and then everybody pretends like we just have to keep on doing what we're doing, and they don't recognize that trauma. So, you know, I think that's a suggestion that I maybe will take back and give some more thought to.
Merci, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra. Fatimata, you said that in your country, media are rather weak, and the relation between journalists is not very useful? Or do you keep trying? Well, that's difficult. It depends on the topic. For example, death penalty. The journalists are afraid to commit themselves because they are afraid of the public opinion and the imams. So they are afraid of approaching a lawyer in order to speak about death penalty. And when it comes to a case which was published, a file which is very notorious, there they might approach us. And if there's a press conference, and if we invite them to talk about press conference, they might come, but they will leave as quickly as they can. And Kirsten, that's a little bit the mirror. You are a blogger and a journalist in Singapore. If you want to talk to a lawyer, a barrister, of a person who is convicted, is that very difficult?
It depends on the lawyer, but I think it is getting more difficult because lawyers are also worried about repercussions of being seen to be activists for their clients. So they just want to stick to the legal process, see it through. So sometimes they are very, very wary. They don't want to be seen as, you know, overstepping their bounds or being accused of overstepping their bounds. And now we have a situation where it's actually quite difficult for late-stage death row cases to even have a lawyer at all. So this year we've had cases where at a late stage, the prisoners are self-representing and, you know, trying to address the court by themselves and struggling with it, or, you know, family members who are trying to represent them. So it is getting quite difficult. I think people are very afraid of being seen to be resisting the government position on the death penalty.
Vous parliez d'avocats commis d'office, hein. Bien souvent.
You have very often a court-ordered lawyer in Singapore. Is that true? Is that correct? A court-ordered lawyer?
Yes. So if you are charged with a capital offense, you can have a court-appointed lawyer at trial and one appeal. But after that, they do not see it as necessary for you to keep having a lawyer up to the point of execution. So it's often the post-appeal stage cases that we really struggle to find legal representation. And the threshold to reopen a case once that first appeal is dismissed is very, very high, and it's very difficult for lawyers as well. They have been hit with cost orders if the courts find that they are abusing court process, and we find that increasingly the courts are finding that these are abuses of court processes.
C'est ça. C'est ça. On peut être condamné, en fait, pour obstruction.
Indeed, you can be condemned because you are too costly. And you have only, we have only some seconds left. Ariane, can we talk a little bit more? Thank you very much. So Anna, I would like to give you the floor because you have similar problems when we come to the press relations. And in your country, I think the press is sometimes a bit more courageous than in the West. Do you think that the dialogue with the journalists in the countries you know well, do you have many contacts with journalists? Do journalists try to get in touch? How does that work?
Yes, we have contact with journalists, and many journalists would want to understand, because they are part of the public, to understand how bad is it about the death penalty. The challenge we are having is the lawyers. Most of them are not ready, like, to open up and say this is bad because of this and this. You would find few organizations ready to share whatever they see about the bad side of the death penalty. But journalists are very, very powerful, very influential in making this message about death penalty spread to citizens, to people at the grassroots level. So for me, I would say we can't avoid, we lawyers and journalists working together, because we lawyers have the content and the journalists have the masses. They have the space to make sure the issue of the bad side of death penalty is spread over, and also to dismantle that public opinion in favor of the death penalty. Thank you.
Vous avez un exemple, par exemple, d'une collaboration?
Do we have an example of some type of cooperation without giving away any names? An example you are free to share with a good relation with a journalist who did a good job for you and for your clients?
Yes, yes. We have some names, the ones that you have not allowed me to mention, but we have a good relationship with international media, the big international media you know. We have a memorandum of understanding with community radios in Tanzania, because we found the community radios are the most listened in Tanzania compared to the national ones. People would like to hear stories and news from nearby their localities. So we've entered into a memorandum and agreement to more than 20 radio stations which cover the whole of Tanzania. So we have these topics about death penalty and many others to change the narrative about the death penalty. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Anna.
Thank you, Anna. We are a bit behind schedule, and I think it's time to give the floor to Anna, who could have joined us. She's American. He's American, sorry. His name is Maurice Bosley, a person who was someone who was very, very active when it comes to the abolition of the death penalty in the United States. And he sent us a video where he talks about what he would have said when he was here. Ariane, are we ready for the video? Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. This is Maurice Bosley, and I'm going to talk to you today about my experiences as a journalist in Chicago and in the United States covering the death penalty and the criminal justice system. In 2011, Illinois became the 16th state in the United States to abolish the death penalty. The road that led to that historic event was paved by, among others, lawyers, citizen activists, politicians, a conscience-stricken governor, and journalists, and I was one of those journalists. I was part of a team at the Chicago Tribune, a newspaper that, beginning in 1999, began systematically examining the criminal justice system in Illinois, the 5th largest state in the country. First came a report on prosecutorial misconduct. Then came a report on every death penalty case in Illinois since the death penalty had been reinstated in 1977. So we're talking about 20 years of cases, 285 of them in all. The newspaper in our report that was published in November of 1999 said capital punishment is a system so riddled with faulty evidence, unscrupulous trial tactics, and legal incompetence that justice has been forsaken. We said that we had identified numerous fault lines running through the criminal justice system, and that these fault lines subverted the very notion that the stakes in cases where the cases where the stakes are the highest, the death penalty cases, should be fail-safe, and they were not. One of the most significant readers of this series of articles was George Ryan, who was the governor of the state of Illinois at the time. He was a conservative Republican who had voted to reinstate the death penalty in 1977. But by 1999, he was already experiencing some uncertainty about the death penalty system. And as he later said in his memoir, my unease was centered on the fairness of the system in Illinois. I had supported the concept of the death penalty, or at least I thought I did, but it was becoming clearer all the time that the process used to determine who the state was going to kill didn't meet the highest of standards that should be met. The outcome of the process, the conclusion, was irreversible. So as far as I was concerned, there should be no room for error, yet there were errors all over the place. So 2 months later, in January of 2000, citing our reporting at the Tribune, as well as the cases that had been exonerated by that point, 12 people had been executed and 13 people had been exonerated from death row. The governor declared a moratorium on all executions. He declared that he was not going to approve an execution, as he said, until I could be sure. Now, he didn't get to that place without the help and guidance of a cast of many, including lawyers, particularly lawyers at Northwestern University Law School Center on Wrongful Conviction, and journalists such as myself at the Chicago Tribune. By examining cases that didn't look just at procedural errors and other legal problems, but for cases of actual innocence, the Tribune helped to change the death penalty debate in Illinois. Instead of asking whether it was right, morally or otherwise, to kill people, to deter others from killing people, the question was reframed. Can the system be trusted to kill the right people? This change allowed politicians who had been historically tough on crime to begin to accept the idea that the death penalty system was a system that did not work. Journalists working dispassionately and following the facts where they led provided a bright light that illuminated what anti-death penalty activists and lawyers had been saying for many years. Encouraged and supported by editors, the Tribune journalists such as myself worked independently and provided a voice that was not easily dismissed as advocacy or political activism. It was just the facts. Our reporting on executions in Texas, the state with the most active death penalty chamber in America, showed how two innocent men, Cameron Todd Willingham and Carlos de Luna, had been wrongly executed. De Luna for a crime committed by someone else, and Willingham for an arson fire that was an accident and not a crime at all. These reports would have been extraordinarily more difficult to complete without the cooperation of and assistance from lawyers. They shared their files and transcripts, helped us locate witnesses, and in the cases where defendants were still alive, provided access to hear the stories of the condemned. We journalists didn't come by this overnight, this cooperation. We worked for it. We examined the records for ourselves. We spoke in our own voice. We demonstrated by our reporting that the trust placed in us was not misplaced. We found that with our credibility established, more doors opened within the legal system and outside the legal system. And the more doors that opened, the more that light was allowed to shine in and expose a flawed death penalty system. Do I think Illinois would have gotten to the same place that it did in 2011 without journalists? I don't know. I tend to think not. I tend to think that we provided a voice that was measured, independent, and factually based, that people could not turn away from. Thank you very much.
Voilà. Un excellent résumé du sujet.
Thanks for this excellent summary of this
d'un point commun essentiel.
Very good cooperation, and indeed research of truth and of facts is what links journalists and lawyers. But now we get to the Q&A, a good half hour of questions of the audience. And so I would like to give the floor to all of you, so that you can ask questions to our panelists. Ariane, is there a microphone? Two.
Je ne vois pas bien.
I don't see very well. Oh, this gentleman. Okay. And then it's your turn.
Merci.
Ah. Préséance aux dames.
Bonsoir. Je vais parler en arabe et
I'm going to express myself in Arabic, and my colleague is going to translate.
Je suis avocate, maître Loubna Sriri.
I am a barrister in Morocco and member of parliament.
C'est pas une question.
And that's not a question, and I would like to ask my colleague to translate, and now I'm expressing myself in Arabic.
Il n'y a pas l'arabe. Je ne pense pas qu'il y a la traduction en arabe.
Loubna, est-ce que vous pouvez continuer en français ou est-ce que vous voulez préparer ça?
Could you express yourself in French? Maybe some other person could ask a question. This gentleman, for example.
Vous avez la parole, monsieur. S'il vous plaît, donnez-lui le
Sir, you have the floor, and we are going to get back to you, madam.
Thank you very much for this chance. I'm very proud to attend this session. When Mr. Kambiz spoken about the situation in Iran, I was imagining that this is the same situation in Egypt. Unfortunately, this is unimaginable that such like these things happen in this time, in the 21st century. I would like to say that we have some focus on this problem which happened in Iran, and this is I agree with this. I am happy with this 100%. But what is happening in Egypt, I think that during 2 or 3 years, more than 2,000 court decisions have been sentenced some people to penalty death. But unfortunately, we are all see that one of the biggest conference for the climatization have been organized in Egypt, and this urge the regime in Egypt to continue. This is as a support for them. So we would like to I didn't see that the international community is condemned the same which is happening in Iran is condemned in Egypt. I don't know why. I would like to get some answer from you.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you so much.
Alors, vous croyez pas si bien dire parce que je pense que les gens dans le public et nous-mêmes, en entendant
people here in the audience and we ourselves, well, we always thought about Egypt at the same time while we discussed here. Myself as well. When I listened to you, I always thought in parallel to the situation in Egypt. You're right, sir. There is a silence about the situation in Egypt.
We felt too that talking about Egypt was missing. There was a slight melody, you know, in this whole that like an echo of Iran, of other places in the world, and I'm sure that we all agree that it's missing. But anyway, we cannot talk about everything, but you are right. Maybe, Kambiz, you want to say something? Maybe you want to...
Yeah.
Please.
I'm very sorry to hear about Egypt. I do understand from the bottom of my heart because it has happened for Iran as well. At some moments, Iranian people felt isolated, felt forgotten. In 2015, for instance, when the nuclear deal negotiations was going on between the Islamic Republic and the international community, the regime in Iran killed more than 900 people, executed them. So it was a very, very high number, but no one cared because the international community at that time was focused on the nuclear deal, JCPOA. This happened even during this year, 2022. So it is almost 2 months that the international community is aware of what's going on in Iran, because all of the people are in the streets protesting. Before that, as I mentioned before, so far, since the beginning of 2022, more than 400 people, 474 people at least, are executed in Iran. 3 months ago, nobody in the international community, I mean, among politicians, of course. I'm not talking about us because it's our concern, of course, but I'm talking about politicians. It was not their concern. So I feel you from the bottom of my heart. And just in maybe 30 seconds, because we are talking about journalism, I thought that I want to mention just some names, because some of my colleagues in Iran are in jail just because of reporting the death of Mahsa Amini. Nilufar Hamedi and Elahe Mohammadi are arrested. They are now under interrogation just for reporting about murder of Mahsa Amini. Nazila Marufian, another journalist, is jailed and she is under interrogation just because of interviewing Mahsa Amini's father, just because of that. Milad Fadai as Sabah Sherdust are arrested just because they are journalists. Masoud Kordpur, Shahram Azmudeh, they are people now, they are in jail just because they are journalists. I would like to remember them. I would like to draw everyone's attention to my colleagues in Iran. And, you know, journalism is not a crime, but they are in jail just because of reporting. So we need the attention of international community in this regard too. So we should be all in this together. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Kambiz.
Thank you. Thank you. This is true because Egyptian journalists are in the same situation. This is almost an international echo. I mean, the journalists there in Egypt are in the same situation as in Iran. I will not comment on what you said, but I would like to give you the floor, Madam.
Are
there other questions? Please. You have the floor.
Bonsoir à tout le monde.
Good evening.
Merci beaucoup, chers panélistes.
Thank you very much, dear distinguished panelists. I'm a lawyer in Senegal. This topic is very important to me. My sister Fatima Mbaye is a lawyer. She is associated to other journalists, and so I analyzed this topic as a lawyer. The investigation secret. What about lawyers, journalists in your countries with respect to this topic? In our country, in Senegal, the investigation secret exists. There is a secret, so certain pieces of information cannot be proclaimed. What is the attitude of the journalists in your countries towards this secret? And what is the attitude of the barrister, the lawyer, with regard to the secret of investigation? Thank you. But this question is directed to everyone here. Who would like to take the floor? Yeah, I will give you the floor, madam, and just after that.
Fatima.
Thank you very much. The practice is the same everywhere. This is the professional secret. A lawyer must not talk about the secrets of the investigation, and he must not propagate information that he or she got from the client. This is the professional ethic, right? It obliges us. But I think there is another interface which is not linked absolutely to the secret. And a lawyer may also he may also help the situation of his client so that the destiny of the client becomes more known, more widely known. And also, this concerns also the process, the trial against him. So the lawyer has several weapons which he may use. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you for this answer. Anna.
Yes, I also want to add to my sister's reply. Yes, a lawyer in Tanzania, I think it's worldwide, a lawyer has a duty of confidentiality to his or her client. If he or she is representing that client. But for human rights lawyers, we have that duty to raise our voices if the prosecution is not fair. So if it's not fair and it is seen not to be fair, we have that duty. We have that moral duty of saying, no, this is not what is supposed to be done. So we have that. But on the other side, the law, especially in Tanzania and East Africa, I suppose, is criminalizing or is not in favor of journalists reporting cases which are under prosecution, under investigation. So you are not allowed to report a case in detail, the case which is in court of law. But as I said, for human rights activists, we usually say no if there are prolonged prosecution, there are prolonged delays in the cases, something like that. So that is what is happening in our jurisdictions. Thank you, Nicholas.
Merci, Anna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna.
Kirsten, you're not a lawyer, but anyway, do you feel that vous avez l'impression parfois que vous avez...
Do you have the impression sometimes that you have violated the investigation secret with regard to sentencing to death? Do you have the impression that once you infringed the secret of an investigation, court investigation?
In Singapore, when somebody is arrested and interrogated by the police, they are alone with the police and they are not allowed access to a lawyer. So we don't need to worry about lawyers revealing investigation secrets because it's a secret to the lawyer as well. So it's very difficult for us because then we sometimes hear from death row prisoners who will claim that, oh, in interrogation, I was intimidated, I was threatened. They gave me the idea that if I didn't, confess or say things that would incriminate myself, that they would call my family to the police station. They say things like that, and it's extremely difficult to prove because there is no independent oversight over the police. The Internal Affairs Office that investigates allegations of police misbehavior is itself a department in the police force. So we don't have in this independent investigation or oversight mechanism that then makes it very difficult for us as journalists to report these things, because how then do we seek verification? How then do we seek corroboration?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Il nous reste 15 minutes. Je vais vous donner la parole.
We have 15 minutes left. Since you asked the floor, I will give it to you. But before, are there more questions here? Are there more questions? So you have the floor. I want to say that the advocacy of the lawyer is also a defense against the death penalty. And when he goes to the Supreme Court, when he makes an appeal, he also defends the abolition. In Morocco, there is one case against a woman that was sentenced to death. The last execution took place in 1993. It was about the Debit case. I want to say that with regard to this relationship between the journalist and the lawyer, Madam Lawyer also has already said it. It's a taboo. It's a taboo topic because this is linked to the professional secret, professional confidentiality. We cannot talk about this dossier before the pronouncement of the judgment. But after the pronouncement of the verdict, then we can meet the journalists. Then we can get them on the nerves. We can ask for details and
Pour se défouler.
Not to show our anger. No, that's not what I wanted to say. I want to say, how can I express this? At any rate, we do not have the right to talk to them before. Yeah, there is this professional secret in Morocco and Senegal. It is complied with, isn't it? Thank you very much for those pieces of information. Sir, you asked the floor. You'll have it now. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Actually, I like to say the word. I have a dream, and I have a belief. I will say it. What type of dream and what type of belief? Actually, I'm happy to attend this. My second time to attend this congress, and the last time when I attended this in Brussels, there was two court cases. Two judges have sent 1,300 people to sentence in two cases for a process which take only 1 or 2 hours. And I'm happy we raised this point last meeting, and then in the final conclusion, they have sentenced clearly in the Congress report about this case, and I'm happy that they stop it in a way and they change it, or they make it, they stop this execution. So my belief, we are actually 3 groups, the lawyer and journalists and NGOs. And this 3 part of this triangle, very powerful actually, if they are unified, or if our strength and our unity. And I believe if we, by these 3 axes, we could change, and we did change already a lot of things. I believe the people here, these 1,000 participants, the most people, they believe and that life is matter, actually. So my dream, if we can find the platform to join these 3 groups together, to be the tongue of the people who are behind the jail. Suddenly today, we have a guy who is he came from Egypt as well. He was sentenced to death, and he could manage to come to Czech Republic. And they deported him today morning to Egypt again. So I was 3 months struggling how to bring the guy out of Czech, because I'm living in Germany. So, and I can't find the way, I can't find the tongue, I can't find the possibility to announce that the guy, he will be sentenced again to death from European countries. So the dream is to find this platform who can join all three, and everyone can put his demand or his acts or the name of the guy, and we can, I believe we can change. Thank you. Sorry for too long.
Merci beaucoup pour cette.
Thank you very much. This was not a question, it was a point of view and a dream. It's always important to share one's dreams. Yes, you started your intervention like a famous man of the United States. Is there somebody here in our audience who would like to ask a question concerning our topic, this cooperation, or the implication of the civil society? Journalists and lawyers are part of the civil society, aren't they? Are there any other topics which you would like to raise? Because there are numerous topics. I know this is the end of the afternoon, it's even the beginning of the evening, but you're still very numerous here. Very many of you are still here. Are there any more questions? Would you like to raise any more topics? You raised your hand? No. You haven't raised your hand. Cambis, you have said that you wanted to add something. Have you been able to add what you wanted to add to our discussion, or would you like to do it now? Yes, okay. Ariane.
Oui?
Yes.
You want to say something?
Would you like to add anything else?
I already talked about my journalist fellows. Thank you very much. But I would like to also mention the fact about Iranian lawyers. The lawyers are also jailed now just because they try to defend people, defend their clients. So in 1-2 cases, we've seen that a lawyer and a defendant went to court and both are arrested now. And the lawyer's crime is only defending the client, which is his job. You know, it's strange, I know that, but it is happening in some countries. And I really hope, he talked about dreams. I also have the dream that we don't see such things one day in the world, nowhere. And of course, all of us wish for a world without death penalty. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Cambis. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Je ne sais pas vous, mais moi j'ai appris beaucoup de choses.
I don't know how about you, but I've learned many things in this conversation. There's a phrase that someone said this evening. There are always moments. I always tell people, don't write down what you're going to say, because you don't have to. You know your topic. But sometimes there are very, very great phrases. Somebody said, can we trust the system in order to know whom we are going to kill? That's a strong phrase, isn't it? This should draw our attention. Lawyers and journalists fight against the death penalty, and they have this phrase in their head. Making mistakes is human. I'm son of a lawyer. Even as a journalist, they have always asked me this question. We belong to people who think that it's better to have a culpable person outside of prison than have an innocent person in prison, right? This cooperation exists. It is not easy between journalists and lawyers. This cooperation is not always a violation of the secret of an investigation. It can take place on a psychological level, on another level. It can be an exchange among lawyers and barristers between different countries. And this requires courage within solitude. I'm thinking about Kirsten here, because lawyers aren't talking to her, right? We haven't talked about colleagues, but the correspondents in Singapore, everyone is going there. They have a great airport, haven't they? But the correspondents there, they don't even talk to the activists. They are going to Singapore to talk about finance and other things, but these mirrors, these facades, well, I think all these different actors have met each other tonight, and they form a global reality. There are countries who had the death penalty and who haven't it anymore. It depends on the states, on the countries. Those countries who are retentionists, well, they have, because some countries are retentionists even though their public opinion is changing. And public opinion is always quicker, I think, than the government authorities. I cannot conclude this debate yet because there hasn't been a clear answer to our question, but I hope nonetheless that this debate was enriching, informative for you. Thank you very much to all our distinguished panelists. Thank you to you, dear audience. Have a very good evening. Thank you.